Please note this podcast discusses real-life crimes and may include sensitive topics such as violence, abuse, and other disturbing content. We recommend listener discretion.
He'd gone out to do a big coke deal with Pablo Escobar and he called him a third world Pedro. He had no idea how big Pablo Escobar was. So Pablo put a hit out on him. He was shot in the head by a swimming pool like the Great Gatsby. And that was the end of Uncle Charlie.
I'm journalist Helen Fospero.
I'm crime reporter Martin Brunt.
And this is True Criminals.
A journey into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld with insights from decades of true crime reporting.
The stories behind the stories, plus exclusive interviews with those closely involved in notorious cases.
Re-examining crimes so shocking, they still haunt our imaginations.
On August the 8th, 1963, a Royal Mail train was ambushed in Buckinghamshire. £2.6 million was stolen, equivalent to 70 million today. In the last episode, we talked to Nick Reynolds, son of the Great Train Robbery mastermind Bruce Reynolds, about the robbery itself and the gang his father assembled for the heist. In this final episode on the robbery, the aftermath, we'll be asking Nick, an artist and musician, about his take on the crime of the century, asking how the legacy came to haunt his father's life and shape his own.
Nick, you were 18 months old when the robbery took place, so your earliest memories must be of moments when, unbeknown to you, I suppose, at the time, your family was on the run.
And what was that escape like?
Well, I remember little bits and pieces of it. My dad hired a private plane to take him to Brussels, and then from there I think he went on to Oslo, and then from Oslo he flew to Mexico. So he went on his own. My mum was being followed by the police everywhere, and at one point they dragged her into Scotland Yard, and she was in there for about 10 hours with Tommy Butler, really, really grilling her big time. And he just said, look, we know that you know where Bruce is. I strongly suggest that you tell us, otherwise we're going to lock you up. And my mum pulled out a toothbrush in her handbag and said, that's okay, I've come prepared. And he couldn't crack my mum, so they kept the police kind of following. Every time me and my mum went out, you would see them like comedy police dotted all over the place. So we went to Ireland a couple of times as dummy runs with my auntie Barbara and Charmian Biggs, that's Ronnie Biggs' wife. And went out there 2 times, and both of those times there's like police hiding in bushes. It was almost like a comedy scene, all these police thinking, my mum's about to make a break for it. So 2 times they followed us out to Ireland, and obviously nothing went on. And the 3rd time, if they were there, my mum managed to shake the police, and then we flew from Ireland, from Shannon, and went over to meet my dad in Mexico there.
Gordon Goody served 12 years, and then he vanished to Spain.
Yeah,
he
had a bar in Spain, yeah.
Yeah, he died in 2016 and kind of avoided the notoriety of some of the others. Buster Edwards turned himself in 3 years after the robbery. He served 9 years, and then he was a flower seller at Waterloo, and his life inspired the film we've already mentioned, starring Phil Collins.
Carry On Train Robbery, as my dad used to refer to it as.
But Buster had a tragic end, didn't he?
Yeah, well, so did my Uncle Charlie. Buster hung himself. I think he'd broken up with his missus and he had drink problems at the time. And I think because he was obviously in the public eye at Waterloo Station, I think he got a bit fed up with it all. People constantly talking about the train robbery, this, that and stuff. It's quite tragic in a way if you think about it, what happened with all the robbers. They all paid a terrible, terrible price, really, for that small amount of being infamous, if you like.
I was there the day Buster's body was discovered, hanging in his lockup.
Oh, right.
And there was a very spooky moment. So while the police forensics were still inside the lockup, round the corner came a glass funeral carriage with 6 black plumed horses,
right.
and just went right past the doors
like
of the
death.
lockup. Yeah, it was absolutely spooky.
Yeah, no, that was tragic. And I was very fond of him. And also, the other tragedy was Charlie Wilson, who was...
What happened to him?
Well, he was executed. He was shot in Spain by a hitman. It was Pablo Escobar. He'd gone out to do a big coke deal with Pablo Escobar, and he called him the third world Pedro. And he had no idea how big Pablo Escobar was, and he insulted him. So Pablo put a hit out on him, and he was shot in the head by a swimming pool like the Great Gatsby. And that was the end of Uncle Charlie.
And Brian Field, he was the solicitor's clerk.
He was the solicitor. He came up with the information for the airport robbery and for the train robbery. He was the go-to guy. He died in a car crash involving, I think, the famous hairdresser Raymond Teasy Weezy. He died young. The other solicitor, I think he only got a few years. Bill Bowl, who was totally innocent, he died in prison.
When your dad was serving his time, Nick, you're young, you were at boarding school. I think you said it in our first episode, you went when you were 8. Did you have communication? Were you able to write to each other or anything like that?
My dad used to write these most amazing letters. You would be given like a double piece of paper that was kind of folded and it had lines on it. And that's all you were allowed to write on as a prisoner. So he had the most immaculate, most beautiful handwriting, like an engraver. It was stunning. And he would write as small as he could to get as much in there. And you had to really kind of focus and concentrate because he'd cram so much in. And to make it interesting so my eyes didn't glaze over, he'd change colour pens every few lines and stuff like that, and draw little pictures and put jokes in there and stuff like that. But he used to write the most amazing letters because he realised the bond that we had. He wanted to maintain that. And the only way we could do that in those days, there's no mobile phones or anything like that, was through visiting and through letters. So I got a letter from him every week.
I think he said in one of them, "I'm no hero, I'm a man who made a choice." I bet they were probably very helpful at the time, were they, to receive those words and make your dad feel a bit closer than he actually was?
Well, we always had this kind of master plan that kept both of us going. Originally, there was no parole. So when he got 25 years, it meant 25 years. And so in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, how old am I going to be when he comes out of prison? Then you heard about the parole, and there's a hope then it could be, well, at any moment he could come out. But what had kept the pervers going was we had all these sort of unfinished plans of what we were going to do. We're going to go to France and watch the Tour de France because we were both very, very keen cyclists. And we had a bucket list of stuff we were going to do. And that kept me going. I actually thought when my dad was released, me and him would go off into the sunset and have a major adventure. And I remember seeing pictures on my way to school, like front page, Bruce Reynolds has been let out of prison. And just about every man with grey hair with glasses in the distance looked just like my dad as I was walking to school. But as they got closer, it would suddenly turn into somebody else. And I thought any minute I'm going to see my dad. And then there he was in a car parked up in the drive of the school. And he said, "Get in the car, son." And I got in the car and I thought, that was it. Goodbye, England. Goodbye, school. He just drove me around the corner, said, "Okay, I'm staying with your Uncle Terry for a little bit, blah, 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 blah. I'll see you in a couple of weeks." It was such an anticlimax. But those years, while he was locked up and I was in boarding school, it was the communication and all the plans of what we were going to do in the future. And I moved in with him, ultimately. He got a place in just off the King's Road, Wandsworth. That was fantastic. I wouldn't say we had the normal relationship that a father and son had. We were kind of more like best friends. I think it's probably the best way to describe the relationship that we had. It was very unconventional.
He told me that when he came out, he found that his fame or infamy was like a millstone around his neck. He couldn't get legal or illegal work anywhere.
Mainly he couldn't get any illegal work because...
He was a marked man.
Yeah, in fact, he got fitted up for a crime he had nothing to do with, and he went back to prison, and he was really pissed off about it because he got a drugs charge which he thought sullied his CV. He thought my CV was perfect, and now I've got this tacky little amphetamine charge. But what had happened, the police for 6 months of the been doing this major undercover operation for this drug had flooded the market. This was in 1988, called Pink Champagne. And one day, one of the guys that the old Bill knew was involved with it, they were following him. They saw him with my dad, and he handed my dad a package. And my dad was going to go and visit a friend of his who ran an illegal spiel. And he said, "Oh, Bruce, are you going to go and see so-and-so? Do us a favour and hand him that." So my dad said, "Yeah, okay." Didn't even ask what was in it. What does he care? And of course, the police have put two and two together, come together with five, busted my dad, realised he's got nothing to do with it, but he has got contraband on him, and they've just blown 6 months undercover. So they just fitted my dad up as the guy they were looking for, but he wasn't. And obviously my dad wasn't going to deny it and say, "It wasn't me, it's this guy, nothing to do with me." And he got 3 years for that, which he was very, very bitter. And my mum had another breakdown. And this is another thing, the train robbery took tremendous toll on my mum. She'd been committed 5 times, nervous breakdowns, and I think he strongly believed that a lot of that was due to the stress of being on the run and everything. She suffered badly. In fact, all the wives suffered, if you think about it, and the children. One minute they're there with their husbands, they got plenty of money and everything's good, and the next thing, bosh, you're locked away for 20 years or something, or 30 years.
Sometimes the police have just 24 hours to gather enough information to charge someone who they believe has committed a serious crime. Could you gather enough information on motive, means and opportunity before the time runs out? If you're fascinated by true crime, then join us in June 2025 for CrimeCon London. Meet the biggest names in true crime TV, experience live forensic demonstrations, and dive deep into the criminal mind with your favourite authors, podcasters, and content creators. From cold case reviews to immersive sessions with crime scene experts and police dogs, this is your chance to be part of the UK's biggest true crime event. Go to crimecon.co.uk now to secure your tickets. CrimeCon London, partnered by True Crime Channel, June 7th and 8th, 2025. The clock is ticking. Find out more and secure your place now at crimecon.co.uk.
From creating history, the studio that brought you Creating Churchill, comes an all-new season of high-stakes diplomacy and backroom deals. This is Summitry. 13 episodes on the power, pressure, and politics when the world's leaders meet. From Hitler and Chamberlain's faithless handshake to Trump's mixed signals with Putin. Join us on Summitry, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
You're an artist and a musician and have probably spent decades working through your dad's legacy and the robbery that he called a masterpiece. But tell me a bit about your music and your sculpture and how perhaps through some of that you've worked through some of the ghosts and maybe some of the pain that it did cause.
The art that I do, I'm not actually making a statement. The art that I do is mainly is dead famous people. And when I say dead famous, I mean that they're famous and they're dead. I do death masks. So
you've done some of the gang members there, haven't you? Including your dad.
I did my dad and I did Ronnie Biggs. Well, I did an exhibition in the 90s. I suppose it's probably the only way I could say I was trying to kind of clear or come to terms with my background and my past. And for me, having a father in prison in the 60s and the 70s, it was a big stigma. It was really looked down upon, and all of my friends at school, their parents would have been the kind of people my dad would have targeted. So growing up in that environment, for me, and keeping it a secret and bottled up, obviously it affected me in some ways. But because in the mid-90s, it was mainly Duncan Campbell started writing, almost eulogising about all these old 60s villains that were coming out of prison, and they were writing books, their memoirs. And they were doing pretty well, particularly Lenny McLean's book, The Governor. And it almost seemed like there was a 60s gangster chic revival seemed to be going on. And in my eyes, this seemed a bit of a paradox. How is this happening? People that are vilified by the media one moment are then suddenly being feted on the celebrity circuit. So I did this, to try to get my head around this, I did this exhibition called Cons to Icons, and that's how I first got to meet Martin and
I
Sky
covered
News.
covered it on Sky News. I mean, some
covered it on Sky,
some
yeah.
stunning head sculptures of your dad and people like Dave Courtney and others.
But they're all people that had written books, had movies done about them, and they'd done this crossover and became this very strange character that shouldn't exist. It was celebrity criminal. And so I said to my dad, who's the kind of the 10, I only did 9 in the end, but I said, who's the 10 most infamous living criminals in England today that have become kind of household names? And he gave me a list, and it took me 5 years to go through each one and to get hold of them and to convince them to let me to put 2 inches of plaster over their head. That's to breathe through straws up their nose. And these are the kind of guys who don't like being put in a vulnerable situation. I was very, very nervous. I mean, some of these people have killed people, you know. And,
well, we filmed you doing it.
I nearly
with
killed Mad Frankie Fraser. I nearly killed him.
How you got him to sit there for so long with plaster all over his face and 2 straws up his nose?
He hasn't done you, has he? No.
It hasn't done me. Well, I'm also the villain.
But the thing is that I'd said to him, I said, well, I explained the process, and I said, I'm going to cover your front and your back of your head with plaster. You're going to be breathing through these straws in your nose. I said, all you got to do is put your hand up at any time, and if you're having problems breathing, I'll rip everything off. You'll be safe, don't worry. It might be uncomfortable. But I'd shown him Ronnie Biggs's, and he came and said, oh yeah, so I like that, that's good. So anyway, when he sat there and I've got all this stuff on his head, I'm chatting away with him. And then I looked at his knuckles, and this is after about 10 minutes. And the stuff is just starting to set, and I looked at his knuckles and they were white, and his hands started to shake, and I said, you all right, Frank? I didn't get an answer, and I tapped on the plaster, and I didn't get an answer, and I thought, fucking hell, what's going on here? So I ripped everything off. Luckily, it was just about hard enough so I could get it off. And as I've pulled off his face, he's gasping for breath. And I said, well, you all right, Frank? He was like, I said, what? I said, what's up? He goes, I've had my nose broken so many times. He goes, I thought I could breathe through it all right. He says, but after about 10 minutes, he said, I started having real problems. And I couldn't breathe through my nose. I said, so what were you doing then? He says, I was holding my breath. And I was so why didn't you just put your hand up? And he said, oh no. He didn't want to be seen giving in. He would rather have suffocated and died, than kind of put the hand up and say, take it off, because I'd shown him that I'd already done Ronnie Biggs's. But the whole process of that and meeting these people and doing that exhibition, and that's really the only thing I could say that I've done art that is linked to my... It was in an effort, really, I guess, to kind of come to terms and cut the albatross of the Great Train Robbery away from me. And I thought that once I'd done that particular exhibition, that would be it. Me and crime could part ways. But it hasn't really, because I've ended up doing books on the train robbery. I've ended up narrating gangsters' books and stuff like that. And I'm doing podcasts. I think it's funny, I worked out one day with my dad. He'd actually earned more money from books, interviews and TV appearances than his share of what the train robbery was.
And ironically, your music with the band Alabama 3, isn't that the theme tune of The Sopranos as well? So there's another little nice link there. That's a bit of an odd one, that one. And of course, that's milked. It's purely coincidental, you see, that everybody thinks Alabama 3 and The Sopranos, they think that it's a gangster song because of the line, get yourself a gun. And obviously because it was used for The Sopranos. But the song's about female empowerment. It's about a woman called Sarah Thornton who was so fed up of being beaten up by a police husband that one day she took his service revolver and shot him in self-defence. So it's about women with guns. It's not about the Italian mob. And you're playing Glastonbury, aren't you?
We're doing
soon,
Glastonbury we're doing Glastonbury this year, headlining on the Avalon stage. So that'll be good. And we got a new album. I think it's number 19. I think I've lost count. Later on this year. So everything's still ticking away.
And have you let go of the albatross, or do you feel, because of course all the things you still do, that actually it's part of your story, it's who you are, it's who your dad is, and are you kind of at peace with that now in some ways?
I don't think I was ever at odds with it. It's just something that I accepted once my dad wasn't available. It's the story that just keeps on giving, the train robbery, and there's still little bits and pieces to come out and stuff like that. I think it's just something that I've grown up with, and I just accept. I've become a voice, a spokesperson for my dad, really, or I suppose there's a handful of characters that I would say know more about the train robbery than anybody else, and because of my dad, I guess I'm one of them. And whenever anybody wants to do anything involved with the train robbery, in the past they would have gone to my dad. Obviously now he's no longer with us. They've gone to me. So from that point of view, I've taken on the media side of what my dad used to do, cashing in on his past crimes. But I don't feel good about it. I don't feel bad about it either. It's just the way my life kind of ended up, and I just accept it, I suppose. You just adapt and get on with things, don't you, really?
You said your dad probably made more money from the media than he ever did from the robbery, but do you think, because not a huge amount was recovered, do you think there's still Great Train Robbery money out there somewhere?
Well, my dad had a big chunk, but I remember we were watching some film once. I think this must have been the 80s or something, and there was some film on television that had been filmed in Mexico, and I remember saying, "Hold on a minute, wait a minute, come on." I said, "What?" He goes, "Look, I buried some money," because he goes, "I buried some money," and it's like, "I bet," and he went, "Oh no, there's a block of flats on it." So he said to me that apparently there was a load of money buried, what he had left of his stash, buried under this block of flats in Mexico. If there is money out there, it wouldn't be worth anything now, would it? All the robbers' money, most of them had it stolen off them, or they lost it through the process of they went to prison and the wife spent it. When they came out, it was gone. My Uncle John, he had his money stolen off him. 3 others, they all hid theirs one place. They had that taken off them. One of the guys who got away, he was the smartest. He bought 15 houses. So you can do the maths. He did really well. Some people did well out of it, and a lot of them didn't really. 15 years, you've got that notoriety, and my dad came out, no one wants to work with you, you're too big. The moment the police see you, they go, that's so-and-so, he did that, so why is he hanging out with that guy? What's going on? So that is the problem when you've got a name for yourself.
We've covered so much, and I've heard a lot of answers from you over the years, but it's still absolutely fascinating. The story does still resonate, doesn't it?
It's become part of, it's so interwoven into British criminal history. And it's odd that England had this fascination for America, the Wild West, and the outlaws of the Wild West. And somehow the train robbery, thanks to the media, resonated with people at the time to create the UK's own version of the Wild West outlaws, if you like. But it's such an incredible story, the fact that the crime was so audacious to stop and steal a train that could say belonged to the Queen. It was the Royal Mail. The sheer amount of money that was taken, the fact that you had the robbers getting caught pretty quickly, some of them. So every day there's more news coming out. There's all these sightings where they're allegedly supposed to have been spotted. Then you've got the biggest court case that England had ever seen. Then you got 2 of the guys within 2 years that had been caught escaping from prison, which was unheard of. The story just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Then the exploits, then the ones who escaped when they got caught, it brought it back in the papers again. That's my dad, obviously, and then Charlie Wilson. And then Ronnie Biggs being found in Brazil with the Daily Express, and that kicked all that off again.
And that wonderful book by Anthony Delano,
fantastic. Slip Up, which became that film, The Great Newspaper Chase.
Yeah, how the Daily Express found Ronnie Biggs and Scotland Yard lost him.
And lost him, exactly, yeah. So it just kept adding more and more and more to the story. And I think kind of Ronnie Biggs single-handedly kept the myth the train robbery in the eyes of the public. And he became the public face of the train robbery. And I think that's why so many people tend to think of him as cheeky rascals, because Ronnie Biggs was a joker and a cheeky rascal.
Latter-day Robin Hoods?
Yeah, but they call them that, but it's ridiculous because obviously they didn't steal from the rich and give to the poor. That they were only perceived that way through the working class people when they got a 30-year sentence, which in the eyes of some people it made them working class heroes against the establishment, and it turned them into martyrs. A 30-year sentence for stealing money that was going to be burned. And as I said, 25 years is what you got for killing somebody back then. And it's ironic that the judge at the time, when he sentenced them, he said, let's forget any notions of daredevilry. This was a sordid crime of violence and greed, and gave them 30 years. Yet 2 years previous, there was a guy that was involved in a robbery where his partner shot somebody, and he was given 15 years, and then the judge said this is way too much and got the sentence down to 5 or something. So it was obviously that he'd been laid on quite heavily by the establishment. And there's still secrets to come out about it. For example, who was the train driver that Ronnie Biggs supplied? Because the old Bill must have known who he was. They must have been able to find out. There can't be that many retired drivers in the area where Ronnie Biggs was living. They knew who he was, and they would have let him go because it wouldn't have suited them to have this lovely old geezer in court. It would have just made the robbers look like a bunch of nice guys with someone who was such an innocent abroad as he was, this train driver. So they knew who he was, but it didn't suit the picture that they wanted to paint having this guy, so he got away scot-free. And then obviously you've got all the shenanigans going on with the police, with how much evidence was planted, etc. Within day one, they had a list, the police, of who was involved, and they pretty much knew who was involved anyway. There was only a few firms that could have been capable of pulling anything of that magnitude off. The point was being able to prove it, of course, you see. So there's still loads to come out, I think, about the train robbery. You think that Harold Wilson, he actually came up with the idea they were contemplating changing all of the UK's currency to render the train robbers' money worthless. And he actually set a paper out and got a commission to find out how much it would cost the UK to do that. And it was obviously, the sums didn't add up, it wasn't worth it. But the fact that he was actually thinking about doing something of that size just makes the mind boggle, really.
That's been a fascinating episode, and lovely for you, Martin, I'm guessing, to see Nick again.
Yeah, and if there are still secrets to come out from the Great Train Robbery, then we'll have you back. It's been fascinating talking to you, Nick, as always.
Well, thank you.
Hey listeners, True Criminals is a new show and your support means everything to us. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps us grow, reach new listeners, and keep bringing you the stories you love. This episode is brought to you by Audio Bleach Global. Our producer is Russell Barnes, with audio production by Andrew Chappell. The original score was composed by Chap Mannequin, artwork by Bleached, executive produced by Lee Mann. Follow True Criminals on Instagram at true.criminals and on YouTube at youtube.com/@true-criminals. For exclusive content and ways to support the show, visit us at patreon.com/True Criminals. For partnership opportunities, please contact us at contact@audiobleachglobal.com.